Hello and welcome once again to the Classics Show. I'm your host Hassan Ali and we are now showing you our fourth episode in which we will be taking a look at the cultural, literary and musical heritage of the United States of America. Do stay tuned. The United States of America is a federal republic consisting of 50 states and a federal district. It has the world's largest national economy and is the third largest country by population in the world. As one of the most ethnically diverse countries on the planet, it has long been a haven of ideas. With an artistic heritage which reflects the multiplicity of cultures and experiences of its people. And I'm delighted to say we have been joined by two very special guests. Our first guest is Miss Judith Raven. Judith is the Deputy Cultural Affairs Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad. She has worked in a diplomatic capacity in places as varied as Santo Domingo, Sudan, Cameroon, and Mexico. Judith holds degrees from Brandeis and Harvard in the U.S., speaks 5 different languages, and is the author of Ballet in the Cane Fields, Vignettes from a Dominican Wonderlog, which was published earlier this year by Inkwater Press. Hello, Judith. Welcome. Thank you.
Hello, and a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. We have also been joined by Mr. Shehzad Hameed. Shehzad Hameed Ahmad went on a Fulbright scholarship to study at New York University's Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute in 2012. He majored in journalism with a concentration in documentary filmmaking. During his 2-year stay, he filmed an independent documentary called The Pakistan Four. This documentary about 4 Pakistani American women who are breaking new boundaries as far as Muslim women are concerned. The world premiere of this documentary took place at New York University Film Festival, followed by a screening at Harvard University in February 2014. Hello, Shehzad. How's it going?
Good, Hassan. Thanks for having me.
The first question I'd like to ask is from you, Judith. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What brings you to Pakistan? And tell us how you're finding it so far.
Fascinating. What brings me to Pakistan is my job. As a diplomat, every few years we get to change location, and I chose Pakistan, so I'm very fortunate.
Tell me why.
Probably because its importance to the U.S. Government. We have, for instance, in cultural affairs where I work, we have the largest exchange program in the world.
Yep.
Which meant for me that there'd be exposure to a whole range of academic and educational and cultural exchange, and that's unique in the world.
Tell us about your work. I mean, what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Maybe I'll give you a little context for what is public diplomacy. So Edward R. Murrow, who is a very famous, distinguished journalist and was director of the U.S. Information Service, talked about the last 3 feet. And how critical that is. The last 3 feet is the distance between us and between us, and that means closing that gap through dialogue, through
exchange. Shall I move
my chair? Well, that's the interesting thing nowadays, because the last 3 feet could be considered to be, in some cases, through technology, thousands of feet. We're able to reach out to other people, so it's a very challenging environment.
Fantastic. And you work on the Fulbright Exchange as well?
Yeah, there are about 34 exchange programs that we handle currently between Washington and all of the cities that come under the U.S. mission. Fulbright is one. And they're all programs that create people-to-people ties, bring people-to-people together, empower both sides, enrich both sides of that equation, Pakistanis and the United States.
Fantastic. And do tell me about your book. I mean, tell me what it's about and what prompted the decision to write it.
It was really an organic development. Over several years, I was writing my impressions. When you're a foreigner in a foreign culture, you're in like high alert. Everything's new, everything's fresh, and so there are these small ironies that you perceive every day, which are part of the pleasures of what I do in my job. And it was just a slow recording of those until I realized, oh my goodness, I have a book I have 3 years worth of musings here, and not my decision. Actually, people who were reading it asked me to do something with it. That's how it happened.
Great, fantastic. And can I just say that over the course of organizing this show, ladies and gentlemen, I mean, I'm notionally meant to organize these shows. I think it was really Judith who made it happen, and I'm really very, very sorry for all the trouble you have had to go through.
Pleasure,
No,
not trouble.
Great, no, fantastic. The most charming woman I've met this calendar year. Okay, Shehzad, now we move on to you. Tell us about your story. Did you always want to be a documentary filmmaker?
So it was an evolution that began in 2005 when I saw an ad in the newspaper that there was a television production diploma that was beginning in Rawalpindi. And I was studying in my undergrad, and I chose to pick something different. I really wanted to do something different, and back then it was either to become an engineer or become a lawyer, and I wanted to break the barrier. And I went there and I started studying, and just the lights and the cameras attracted me, and I just couldn't stay away from it after my first meeting with them. And I soon began my career as a journalist, as a broadcast journalist for television in Karachi. And over a period of 6 to 7 years, I worked in print and online journalism after my stint in television. I was fortunate enough to be selected on a Fulbright scholarship, and this was in 2012, and I went to New York. And that was a new world opening up for me.
Yeah, start spreading the news.
Yes.
I'm leaving today.
Yeah, so my transformation went from being a news person to going into investigating issues and finding out about the world out there in detail, which was documentary filmmaking. In this process, I got to make my first independent documentary called The Pakistan Four. So,
tell us about that. Tell us about this documentary.
Well, it took me about 8 months to make the documentary. And when it comes to visual arts, 8 months is a long period of time because visually people will change, the people that you're working with. And so I was working with four. I found out about Pakistan's first international weightlifter, the first international chef, and then I found out about a British Pakistani comedian in America. And it was a very human interest story that follows their struggle and then builds up to one event in their lives. In the West, when I was there, we usually find a very one-sided perspective of Pakistan, and especially emanating from news. And we all know that bad news is good news for news. Indeed. But then we don't see the other side of a country or a population. So this was an effort to inspire women in Pakistan. So I think this is a great documentary, and most of the audiences were full of women for this documentary. And I've gotten some amazing reviews from people who've seen it, and mostly women who've come out all inspired, who are ready to break the mold and go out there and live their lives.
So Shehzad and Judith, thank you once again for being a part of this show. Shall we dive into the content now?
Sure, let's do that.
Are we ready to rumble?
Yeah.
We're ready.
Okay, great, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now be looking at literature and the written word in our first segment, Letter and Spirit. Do stay tuned. In our first segment, we obviously, look at literature, whether that's in the form of novels or in the form of poetry. Today, we've done something slightly different. Instead of me picking all of the content, which I do normally just to gratify my own ego, I've had our guests pick some of the content, and Judith has picked a poem for us, which is particularly close to her heart. Judith, tell us about this poem, first of all, why you picked it, and what it's called.
Sure. This poem is by Langston Hughes.
Okay.
And Langston Hughes was a seminal figure in what's called the Harlem Renaissance movement, which was a resurgence of African American contribution in the arts. That means film and music and jazz in particular, and theater and dance. And what he did is a little different from what other African Americans had done until that point, which is he put on paper his struggle.
Right.
He reflected the reality, including the suffering, but including the joy and the tradition from Africa of music. And so his poetry is very musical also.
So and so you've picked this because this is a poem which is particularly close to your heart.
I picked this because I feel in this poem the poet calls to task America. He says,
Yep.
I am part of that promise, and this is what I require from you.
Okay, well let's have a listen.
Okay, it's called I Too Sing America. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare send me eat in the kitchen. Then, and besides, they'll see how beautiful I am, and they'll be ashamed. I too am America.
Beautiful, fantastic.
Wow.
What did you think of it, Shehzad?
I think that, I haven't read a lot of Langston Hughes, but like the kind of poetry that, I can feel that either he comes from like the south of America or maybe from the New York area, because he's talking about the diversity of America, and I feel that, this is what I get. I mean, I'm not like an expert poet or anything.
No, that's
but,
fine, of course.
But I feel that he's talking about the diversity of America, and he's putting it beautifully, because like this reminds me of a conversation that Einstein had with his teacher, and they were discussing whether if there is something called as heat and cold, and he said that either it's heat or there's an absence of heat. And when he says like I'm the darker brother, he's talking about the different complexions and colors that exist in America, and there is no white and black. It's either black or it's the lighter version. So I feel that he's put it beautifully in context when it comes to the diversity of America.
There seems here to be a kind of militant reaction as well in this poem, because the second stanza reads, "Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then." That's almost like as if you're basically, when you're sometimes in those situations where you've basically lost a game or something. Is he not, in a sense, being defiant as well, it's instead of just proud? I'm opening this up to both of you.
I feel he's calling America to task.
Okay.
Because there is a constitution, there is a Declaration of Independence, which does say we're all equal. Mm-hmm. We all have certain inalienable rights, and that is access to justice, and that is liberty. Mm-hmm. And what he's saying is, yes, I'm part of that. I'm laying claim to my stake in that, in those founding documents of the United States.
And here's another point. It's not like, you're discriminated based on religion where you can't see it.
Indeed.
You're talking about things that are physical.
Indeed.
You can see them.
Yep.
It's their identity that we're questioning. It's not the beliefs that we're questioning. Their beliefs are as good as anyone else's.
Indeed.
We're actually questioning their presence.
Right. Yeah. And the third is very interesting. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed, dash. In other words, he's sort of not only saying this, this is not simply an outward address. In poetry, we talk about this idea of not simply talking to an audience or to a reader, but also speaking to yourself, an internal dialogue, a dialogue with your own consciousness. Is he not at the same time as, sort of resisting and being defiant and calling America to task, as you've said, is he not also appeasing himself? In a sense, is he not sort of saying, well, I am beautiful? Because if you're told that you're not enough times, a part of it will sink in.
He is saying what he knows, and that's why he's saying the other will be ashamed. But there's something else about the Harlem Renaissance, and that is that it galvanized interest from communities of all colors, and it crossed the color line. So in creating this explosion of the arts went from African American community to mainstream, and that was very important. So that voice that was from a particular community went further.
But there will be some people, there are some people, Judith, who say that actually this term, the Harlem Renaissance, is a patronizing white man's term for what is essentially, I mean, even though it wasn't coined by a white man, is a patronizing term for which basically seeks to delineate a time in which African American and minority writers began to express their voices and take pride when actually their cultures are much older than the Harlem Renaissance. I mean, there's some critics who say this tag, the Harlem Renaissance, the fact that it's still used to describe this period of literature is in itself somewhat derogatory. What do you think?
It has a time and place. I mean, it did really occur in Harlem. In fact, today in Harlem on 127th Street, it was renamed Langston Hughes Place. So that's Harlem embracing its own historical identity. I'll let Harlem speak for itself.
When people think about the great American writers still seem to be from a very, very narrow sort of socio-economic, racial bracket. John Steinbeck, F. Scott Fitzgerald, T.S. Eliot, even though he was more or less British, Roth, Updike. What do all of these people have in common? They're all white. They all went to Ivy League schools. They're all upper middle class. Langston Hughes is not really being taught outside of America, from what I gather, okay? And in a sense, even when people look at racism and they look at, who has helped to sort of eradicate or bring it into the public consciousness, they think of these white middle-class men who've basically highlighted racism, something like The Great Gatsby, where Tom Buchanan is basically a Nazi, more or less, so things like that. Why is it that these writers, despite being so brilliant, Toomer is another one, they're not, they haven't sort of remained in the worldwide consciousness. Does that make sense?
I have a question to a question, and the both of you will tell me. Have you ever heard the expression, a dream deferred?
Yeah, I've heard that.
I've not heard it. No.
I've heard that.
That's Langston Hughes.
Right, okay.
And that is an expression that has entered the collective unconscious of the United States.
Right.
But it actually comes from a poem of his.
Right.
A Raisin in the Sun. That's another expression we just use. That's from Langston Hughes. So sometimes people are not credited with their contribution, but in fact it definitely enters our sense of what is out there. And it also might be the circles in which each of us travel.
Indeed.
I know in the United States there's an incredible conscious effort to make sure that students going through primary school, high school, are exposed to these different streams of contribution to our literary tradition. It might be that hasn't traveled far outside the United States, but we definitely make that correction.
Yeah,
and I think it is our duty on this program actually to exhibit the diversity and the range, and because people are expecting certain things. But you'd want to change some perspectives as well.
Give them the other.
Give them the other. No, indeed. Give them as much as you can. Shehzad, you were going to say.
But I went to New York and I went to Harlem and I experienced the place itself. Harlem, especially, is a place where a lot of culture has emerged, like in terms of cinema, in terms of the local music, in terms of you've heard about the Harlem Shake, right?
Of course, yeah.
So all these things have evolved over time. And especially like people like Langston Hughes have played a big role in that. And when I used to walk in Harlem, you can see the people dress differently. They imbibe the countries that they come from. You'll see the Jamaica in there. You'll see the Africa in there. All those flags waving around. So it's a very completely different experience when you go to Harlem, actually. And then it's easier for me as a person who hasn't read this guy to understand where he comes from.
Some would say that it's really rather sad that you and I haven't been exposed to this as much as we ought to have been. Right now, I mean. Just to talk about my own experience, okay? I studied literature in Britain, okay? So, and I actually did a module on American literature. Not there,
Yeah,
that's not great.
You
That's
sort
not
of miss
great.
things out. There's some great literature in Pakistan that a lot of people in the West, like I've heard like Saadat Hassan Manto is now in the curriculum at Columbia, which is a
That's
great thing.
wonderful, yeah.
Which is a great thing, but it's going to take time, and especially for writers who come from a certain social class. I mean, they will take time to go into the mainstream.
Every year in February, there's a commemorative month. It's called African American History Month. And
That's
it is, an effort to educate others about these contributions.
We will move on to the next excerpt, probably more canonical in some ways, a more famous, I'm not saying rightly or wrongly, but probably a more sort of a passage which has probably been read by more people. And this is from F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Now, in the UK, this book has a reputation that basically far exceeds most works written even in the British Isles, from what I've gathered. I mean, someone like Stephen Fry, for example, says that word for word, it is the most beautifully written piece of literature in the English language. Martin Amis says that because of this novel and other similar novels, you can safely say that the 20th century belongs to America as far as cultural contribution is concerned and as far as literary contribution is concerned. I'm just going to read out an excerpt from this novel. We'll have a chat about it. Already it was deep summer on roadhouse roofs and in front of wayside garages, where new red gas pumps sat out in pools of light. And when I reached my estate at West Egg, I ran the car under its shed and sat for a while on an abandoned grass roller in the yard. The wind had blown off, leaving a loud, bright night, with wings beating in the trees and a persistent organ sound as the full bellows of the earth blew the frogs full of life. The silhouette of a moving cat wavered across the moonlight, and turning my head to watch it, I saw that I was not alone. 50 feet away, a figure had emerged from the shadow of my neighbor's mansion and was standing with his hands in his pockets, regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested that it was Mr. Gatsby himself, come out to determine what share was his of our local heavens. I decided to call to him. Miss Baker had mentioned him at dinner, and that would do for an introduction. But I didn't call to him, for he gave a sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. That was from The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Judith, thoughts?
It's beautiful. It's incredibly graphic and cinematic. You can feel the wind, you can see the color, you can hear noises, the phrasing. I mean, it's beautiful.
Some people say that this is, a lot of people I've heard say that for what it is, a novel which is, a novella rather, which is about 100 pages long, it is the most beautifully written thing in the English language. Now, whether one agrees with that or not, you can still say that it's pretty good, But what I wonder about this is, if we're thinking about Americanness, right? This, to me, seems to be saying something about Americanness or New Yorkness, which is here referred to as West Egg and East Egg. This place where nature has almost been superseded by roadhouse roofs and wayside garages and gas pumps sat out in pools of light. What would you say to that?
Well, remember, everything occurs in its historical context. This was the mid-1920s.
Yes.
This was between the two world wars.
Mm-hmm.
It was a time when in America everything was possible. Business was booming. The enrollment in university was double.
Mm.
So on the one hand, there was this great possibility, and then on the other, there was this great disillusion. People had seen the savagery of war.
Mm.
And so I think he's also bringing out that disillusionment.
The great difference is that whereas the tragic in literary fiction, what is tragic in Britain would often be passed off as a joke, so you'd laugh at yourself. Jane Austen, Charles Dickens. In American fiction, actually, there is this sense of tragedy and loss and disillusionment with the American dream, which pervades all of its fiction, more or less. And you do look at someone like John Steinbeck, F. Scott Fitzgerald. These guys aren't very funny.
And we're laughing.
No.
But I feel that, it depends on the inspiration that most people or most writers take. And I mean, I'm sure that Fitzgerald took a lot of inspiration from New York, the city.
Yeah.
Or if you compare Mohsin Hamid, who took a lot of inspiration from Lahore.
Yeah.
So the cities play a vital role, and the culture that it brings with that. And I feel that, and he's definitely talking about the transformation of New York itself. And it went on, and the culture of New York has changed completely. So I think he talks about how the parks and spaces ran out and they were converted into buildings, and it became a concrete jungle, and I can see that in his writing and how it affected him.
People think it's about The Great Gatsby, but really the book is a first-person narrative, i.e. written in one person's voice. And that person is a guy called Nick Carraway, who moves from where he's based in the Midwest to New York City in the search of opportunity, with full of hope. And you just see throughout the course of the novel how he gets more and more disillusioned by the mechanical explosion around him, by this place where there isn't time to think, and everything seems very superficial, and the wealth is disgusting, and the modernity is disgusting, and the soundscape irritates him, and the people are shallow. And I've always wondered, why is it that he chose that as a theme?
Every one of us has gone from a small place to a bigger one. And I think that's a common narrative that everyone, I think that he's taken an easier route. I think that if he'd gone from a developed place to an underdeveloped place, I would have loved that.
Okay.
Because when I went from Islamabad to New York, I can really connect with everything he's saying.
Okay.
From instantly falling in love with something that you've never seen, but then growing out of love very easily because of the mechanics involved, and you transforming from being a human being to something which is just a part.
Okay.
Which you don't really like.
Okay. So now that we've looked at these two extracts, I would like to ask a question to both of you. And it's not a question that I feel I could answer at all, right? And it's this: what does American even mean? What does this term mean? When I was at university, we used to be asked, what does it mean to be British? And it used to take hours to try to explain it. I hope you can do it in a couple of minutes.
Well, there's the difference. What it means to be American, it means social mobility, it means equality for all, it means the land of opportunity, it means working hard, it means diversity. All those things are Americanness. Now,
does it mean disillusionment?
It could. Americanness at a particular point of time certainly can mean that. But it also means the weight of public opinion, using whatever you have at hand and making society aware of what that is to make a better society.
What about you, Shehzad? Well, you're Pakistani, right? But you spent a good deal of time in America. What does this word American mean?
Judith has completely defined what American means, but there's a flip side to it. And the flip side is all the opposites of the words that she used, which is also a reality, because there is upward mobility, but not for all.
Indeed.
There is cohesiveness, but not for all. There is everything there in that country, but not for all. And that is something that people or Americans need to know or realize as well, because they take it for granted, which really isn't there for everyone. There is whenever there is competition, there is somebody who's going to succeed and somebody who's going to fail. So I think that people just take it for granted that they will get it, but it's not really the case.
One critic, of course, said that America was simultaneously nothing and everything.
Well said.
I
would agree.
That is, in a few words. Okay, well, that concludes our segment. After a short break, we'll be taking a look at film and drama. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Classics Show. Now, if Judith picked some of the content for the literature section, we had Shehzad pick his favorite American film for us to take a look at, and he went for Blood Diamond. Tell us why, Shehzad.
Cinema has been moving closer to reality since the 50s, and there was a point where everything would be or feel unreal, and the transformation from going from unreal to real has been what Hollywood has done really well. And I think that Blood Diamond is so close to reality, and it's so close to what I do as a filmmaker, as a documentary filmmaker. I document reality. And now I think that they're recreating reality so well, especially this particular movie, that I was so moved. And in terms of cinema, in terms of scripting, in terms of camera work and screenplay, all those things just like gelled so well.
Fantastic. Right, well, let's take a look at Blood Diamond, starring Leonardo DiCaprio. Let's have a look at the trailer.
It came from the heart of the earth. A stone so rare, men will do anything to possess it. And all who touch it are left with blood on their hands.
That diamond is my ticket out of this God-forsaken continent.
So what are you?
Smuggler? You're a journalist. Some tell me you're here to make a difference, huh?
And you're here to make a buck?
You know, in America it's bling bling, but out here it's bling bang. Where did you bury it? The only reason you're still alive is because you haven't told anyone where it is.
You will find it for me.
My son! Where is my son?
What if I helped you find your family? That makes us partners!
I am not your partner!
You're using him.
I'm using him, and you are using me, and this is how it works.
You're gonna steal this diamond.
I am his father! I must go find him!
You to show us where it's hidden?
That diamond's the only chance he has of getting his son back.
What if I wanted to go with you?
I don't give a damn who's down there. Kill them all.
Give it to me.
Get him where it is! Get him!
My family, my home, I don't lost everything! I will find you. If it takes my life.
And that was Blood Diamond. So just quickly, Shehzad, without spoiling the plot of this film, for those who are watching, tell them why they should go to see this movie.
I mean, in terms of like going into the details, I think Edward Zwick has done a great job in translating the reality and not spoiling it by the Hollywood flick culture. And he's shot it in a beautiful way. He shot it in a guerrilla manner, and he's done the characterization in the film has been done remarkably well. When you meet Danny Archer, who is the main protagonist, Leonardo DiCaprio plays the role. You can see the way he speaks is so South African.
Rhodesian, yeah.
Rhodesian, and or Zimbabwe, you can say. But you can see the African accent. So if people want to watch it, they should watch it for great acting, knowledge, because it's about a real story. It's about diamond miners who get abducted by these gangs who fund themselves through the sale of diamonds. Hence the name Blood Diamond. So it's great knowledge if somebody wants to watch it, and it's so close to documentary filmmaking that you come out as a different person.
Right. Well, you have the power on this show. Okay, we'll be moving on to our final segment on music. Do stay tuned. Okay, so we were talking about the Harlem Renaissance in the section on poetry and literature. What we're going to play for you now is something which is rather related to this idea, and it's a jazz piece by the saxophonist Benny Golson, and it is probably one of my favorite pieces. And in this section, I actually did get to pick what we were going to show the audience. Let's take a look. This is Killer Joe. We'll talk about it after playing the excerpt. That was Killer Joe by Benny Golson from the Legends of Jazz series. Do you like jazz music, Judith?
I love jazz.
Do you love it?
Yeah.
Yep. So this is something, many people think this is the biggest cultural contribution to the world of music for the last sort of 100 years, you know, right? So jazz emerging in America from this sort of marriage of African and European music structures created something which was just, you know, Amazing.
Well, you know what they say about jazz?
What is it?
Born in America, enjoyed worldwide.
Indeed, well it is. Well it is. That was a kind of jazz, I think, which is called bebop. There are loads of different kinds of jazz. That's one of the older variants, which is characterized by this, you know, sort of throbbing, sort of walking bass, improvisation, freedom, you know, restlessness. Normally, you know, I mean, in classical music, for example, you have things are just very delineated. You know what a sonata is, you know what a fugue is, you know what a passacaglia is. But here, really, you know, it's basically you're basically improvising. Sometimes not even in a key, you know. So virtuosity, rhythm, all kinds of cool things going on there. Thoughts, Shehzad?
Well, I heard this, there was a Sufi conference in New York, and it was a jazz and a Sufi, like it was, I don't know what the name was, but they conjoined the Sufi players with the tablas and the flutes with all the jazz players, and it was one hell of a show in New York. It really represents the kind of people that both countries have.
Yeah, very similar in some ways. You wouldn't think it sometimes, but yeah, there is that similarity. Anything to say about this, Judith?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, there's a structure, there's a language that every musician understands, and then within that structure, everyone has a chance to take flight. And so I think that's for me, as a listener, that's the enjoyment, to see where they take that main melody, each person's musical imagination. So yeah, mastery between spontaneity and mastery.
In music, there is a note, an interval called the flat fifth. And that was an interval which was called the Devil's Note in the United States, because it was prevalent in sort of African slaves, you know, I mean, in their chanting, in their music, went into the blues, then went into jazz. And some centuries ago, you could actually be put to death for playing that note, the flathead fifth, the blues note.
Wow, I mean, they say that, you know, great art emerges from places that have gone through hell.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm sure, like, you know.
Very well put.
Yeah. You know, there's all these Sufi musicians or, you know, jazz musicians. They've seen some tough lives.
Okay. Anything else to say about this, or shall we move on? Okay.
Let's move on.
But it was Americanness. Thank you.
That was Americanness, wasn't it? That was very American. I mean, you know, have some faith in us, you know. I mean, we do our best, you know. Some research goes into this program, Judith. You know, we know a thing or two.
That is wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, finally, ladies and gentlemen, just to close off this show, we've got probably the most famous piece of classical music to come out of the United States ever. It's by the composer Samuel Barber, who was probably one of the most tortured composers that you'll ever read about or encounter, lived most of his life as a recluse, but he produced this piece of music called the Adagio for Strings. Here it is, played by the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Leonard Slatkin, and just before we play it, I just want to say, this is known, in polls, this always comes top of the saddest piece of music ever composed. So keep those handkerchiefs ready. We're going to play it. Adagio for Strings by Samuel Barber. That was an excerpt from Adagio for Strings, composed by Samuel Barber and here performed by the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. That one never leaves a dry eye. Huh? You know, I mean, it's kind of, I mean, yeah. It's one of my favorite pieces of music, but for some people it works. You know, they have like this sort of cathartic rush. But with that, we have come to the end of our show, ladies and gentlemen, which is a shame. I'd just like to thank you once again, Judith.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the United States and Pakistan together over culture in the last 3 feet.
Thank you, thank you. And those 3 feet were 3 feet too many. I think I'll get into trouble for saying that. Shehzad, thank you so much for coming. Have you enjoyed yourself?
I loved it, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
And, you know, I mean, we wish you all the best for your documentary endeavors in the future. And look forward to, you know, your name being up in lights, basically.
And the Pakistan 4 screens in Karachi and Lahore soon.
Good, good. Yeah, no, great. No, of course. Judith, you've been illuminating. I've been, you know, I've given you so much grief over this program, but it came together, you know. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for this edition of the Classics Show. Do join us next week for more from the US in our second part. Until next time, goodbye. See you soon.
Thank you.